to his former campaign chairman, Paul Manafort, who was convicted on 8 different charges in criminal court yesterday. The president tweeting, "I feel very badly for Paul Manafort and his wonderful family. Justice took a 12-year-old tax case, among other things, applied tremendous pressure on him, and unlike Michael Cohen, he refused to make up stories in order to get a deal. Such respect for a brave man." All right, a lot to chew on there. Andy, I want to ask you right out of the gate. So what is it that the president himself could be guilty of here? You're allowed to contribute as much as you want to your own campaign, right?
Right.
So it would be that he didn't report it.
Right.
Is it more beyond that?
Well, it's the same campaign finance infraction that Cohen pleads guilty to, but I think it's a much tougher case against the president, in part for exactly what you just laid out. The candidate himself does not have a dollar limit on what he can expend. So he doesn't have this $2,700 limit in the front of his mind like other people would have to have. The other interesting fact here, among others, is that Cohen is a lawyer and President Trump isn't. So I think just as a prosecutor trying to clinically look at this in terms of who's easier can you make beyond a reasonable doubt proof of intent, it's a tough case on the president because he may not have thought about this at all. And when you're dealing with a crime that's kind of a regulatory type infraction in the sense that it's not like murder, which is something that's innately wrong. These are things that are illegal because we choose to regulate them and make them illegal. They generally mean that you have to have a higher standard of proof in order to convict someone. It almost defies the old adage that ignorance of the law is no excuse. You really do have to have a sense that you're
What would the
violating
penalty
the law.
for that be, though? I mean, if that's what he's guilty of, can you see? Because I mean, I don't know. At this point, it's not hard to believe that if you're having an affair, you would try and cover it up.
Right.
And if Lonnie Davis is trying to make the case that if it's to win an election, that carries is there some nuance in there that would carry a heavier? Because I know the Obama campaign, for example, had $2 million in illegal campaign contributions. They paid a fine.
Right.
So I don't know.
Yeah, I think what Lonnie is trying to do is create the narrative with a framework in which we're going to understand what happened here. And what they want to say, what he wants to say, is this is a payment to affect the election. And
that's what Michael Cohen said.
Right. Well, but what I'm saying is that works as a narrative, but the technical legal crime is not a payment to affect the election. You are allowed to pay for non-disclosure. You're allowed to pay for someone's silence. Non-disclosure agreements happen all the time. The crime here is exceeding the $2,700 limit in an in-kind campaign contribution. That's the crime. And to prove it against Trump would be more difficult than to prove it against Cohen. But I think, the overlay here, which we always have to stress, is when the president is implicated in misconduct, the president's not going to be indicted. The sitting president is not going to be indicted under Justice Department guidance. So it's always about impeachment with respect to a president. And if you have somebody who's implicated in misconduct, the question is it misconduct of a grade that the House would find meets the standard of high crimes?
Well, Lanny Davis didn't agree earlier today that he didn't agree that the president couldn't be indicted. He said, we'll see, kind of thing, as if they may pursue that.
Right.
And he also, to your point, I mean, you said that's what Michael Cohen said. Lanny Davis actually disputed that. He said that's what the U.S. attorney said of the Southern District, to which he pled, but he himself didn't say that. I don't know if that's meaningful.
I think they actually both said it. Michael Cohen had to sign something basically agreeing with what the facts of the case that were outlined in court by the prosecution. I think that if Donald Trump wasn't president and didn't have those Justice Department guidelines, there's a good chance he would have been indicted yesterday as a co-conspirator in this. That a lot of legal experts think that's probably the case. And I also think we should take a step back here. John Edwards was brought to trial over something very similar with actually less evidence. And the real question, Melissa, is what else does Michael Cohen know? What has he told Mueller? What has he told prosecutors working on other cases? He has been intimately involved with the Trump family, the Trump organization, and Donald Trump for a very, very long time. And I think that that's why you saw last night Donald Trump being a little careful not going after him at that rally, because I think the president might be a little nervous about what else.
To me, that
Cohen
sounds
knows.
like you're saying, though, that you think that there isn't enough there with this in and of itself.
That's not true.
The hope is that there's more.
I actually think there's enough. I think there's enough here. This
For
is
what, though?
And but Andy just laid out.
Because it doesn't sound like, I mean, it's something that you get fined for.
Look,
I mean,
yeah,
are you hoping he goes to jail? Or?
I think it's a tough case as to him. But, you know, the other thing you have to bear in mind with respect to Cohen, to respond to Marie's point, Cohen was originally Mueller's case, okay? Mueller allowed the case to go to the Southern District of New York.
Well, he kicked it to them.
Right, but if he regarded Cohen as a make-or-break, very material witness for his investigation, he would have done the same thing to Cohen as he did to Manafort, who he is obviously squeezing because...
And one different ingredient with Michael Cohen, though. He didn't stay true to the president. And the president didn't stay true to him. He didn't bring him along after the campaign. I mean, there were already some relational type situations that were being reported there, too.
Right.
And that act of disloyalty on either part, maybe it was first with the president not bringing him along, I mean, it opened a door. So you could treat him probably legally a little bit different, too. Plus, his background is the deputy chairman of the RNC for finance.
Yeah, well,
I mean, this was a guy who was going to play differently anyway, because he really did know about the 2,700.
Yeah.
He would have known about all of that.
I think that's relevant to Trump's calculations, but as the prosecutor, I think, you know, one of the things that you want to bear in mind is how effective would Cohen be as a witness? I mean, notice one of the things that...
Has that changed? Is he not effective now?
Well, look, he pled guilty yesterday to a standard plea agreement. He did not plead guilty to a cooperation agreement, which is what you do with someone you anticipate is going to be a
Not
witness.
the meat,
No,
the vegetables.
Well, but normally what you would want to do
Like
is
Flynn.
you get the guy to plead guilty to everything, and then his only way out is to cooperate with you, and you file a motion at the end that allows the judge to sentence him to something very light. They didn't do that with him.
That could happen here,
Hold
right?
on, I want to get in here though. So
Well,
there's
not at this point.
So there's two different things going on. There's the legal angle, which you just mentioned. You think President Trump's liability legally is low in this case. You look at campaign finance violations happen all the time. President Obama's 2008 campaign was actually one of the largest we've seen, with $2 million of illegal campaign contributions.
But that didn't involve
fined
him
$375,000. It was his campaign, Marie. But let's talk about the politics of this as well, which is the other angle. I do think this is bad for Republicans in the sense I've always been told in political narratives it comes in threes, right? So now you've got Manafort, Cohen, Collins, Duncan, Hunter.
Yeah.
This is not good for Republicans. This has not been a good week for Republicans. But in regard to impeachment, which you've brought up, I think that's going to be tough for Democrats because it doesn't look like they're going to have a sweep in the House in the sense of you'd have to have an overwhelming margin of Democrats in the House for them to entertain the idea of impeachment. But what will happen if Democrats win back the House? One, there'll definitely be articles of impeachment filed by some members. Two, you're going to have tons of hearings that are going on by Democrats. Essentially, you know, you're going to have multiple hearings going on. This is what Democrats are going to be talking about. And, you know, that does hurt President Trump in trying to move things forward for his agenda.
Their constituencies have warned them against that. I mean, even I've heard Marie say, you know what, you can't make it all about, you know, resistance and go after the president on impeachment. I mean, you've got to have a message.
I think yesterday changed that calculation.
It's interesting, and I do think that it could really blow up in Democrats' face, because if you go after the president on this count and say we're going to impeach, that then it energizes Republicans who feel like they're having their president taken away. There were also two things
And
that
money,
before we go
tax cuts.
that Lanny that Lanny Davis did on our earlier when he was in that interview that I thought were kind of undermined his point, saying that he had this come to Jesus moment at Michael Cohen when he was watching the Helsinki press conference. You know, that doesn't, I think for the average American who hears that, that's not really believable. And that's sort of Lanny Davis putting a political spin and making a political point on a case. And I think that doesn't help him. He also kind of begged for money twice in that interview with Sandra Smith, where he talked about the website, go and donate money to Michael Cohen. That money, you know, you would assume is going to his defense and would go to Lanny Davis. And he did it twice in that interview. A little distasteful.
Well, they were up to like $17,000, I think they reported last night. So money is part of the equation.
We got to go. Much more to talk about. We've barely scratched the surface so far. President Trump again stepping into the fiery debate over some NFL players refusing to stand for our national anthem. The president blasting ESPN's decision not to televise the anthem before games. Is this the right way for the network to handle the controversy? We'll debate that one, plus new fallout over the verdict in the fraud trial of former Trump campaign chairman Paul Manafort. We'll discuss the impact on the president and the Mueller investigation.
I feel very badly for Paul Manafort. Had nothing to do with Russian collusion. We continue the witch hunt.
We come in with this Fox News alert, new reaction from the president after a federal jury found his former campaign chairman, Paul Manafort, guilty on 8 counts of the 18 on bank fraud and tax fraud, with a mistrial declared on those other 10. Manafort could face a maximum of 80 years in prison. His sentencing is scheduled for a week from today. President Trump reiterated Manafort and the case brought by Robert Mueller have nothing to do with Manafort's work for the campaign. Watch it.
Paul Manafort's a good man. He was with Ronald Reagan. He was with a lot of different people over the years, and I feel very sad about that. It doesn't involve me, but I still feel, it's a very sad thing that happens. This has nothing to do with Russian collusion. This started as Russian collusion. This has absolutely nothing to do. This is a witch hunt, and it's a disgrace.
Meanwhile, yesterday, as the president headed to political rally in West Virginia, top Senate Democrat Chuck Schumer warned the president against any pardons of Manafort or his former attorney, Michael Cohen.
I understand the president's on his way to a rally. He better not talk about pardons for Michael Cohen or Paul Manafort tonight or any time in the future.
He better not. Oh. That sounded like he could do something about that. Andy, in all of this with Paul Manafort, even the judge in the case, T.S. Ellis, said, we aren't going to discuss Russian collusion. It is not part of this case. Why hammer that point now if you're the president and legal team? What are they trying to accomplish that the judge already didn't accomplish for them?
I really don't know. I think it's a mistake to keep hammering this because I really think if you look objectively at what's happened here, I really don't think Mueller is trying to make a collusion case against the president. I think Mueller is pursuing his original objective, which is Russia's interference in the election, of which the collusion thing was one strand. And my view of it is he's interested in Manafort because of Manafort, not because of Trump and collusion. And the reason I say that is he's had Gates as a cooperator for 6 months. There's nothing that Manafort knows about Trump and Russia that Gates doesn't know. And yet what has happened since Gates been a cooperator? He's brought 2 indictments against groups of Russians that don't even hint that there was any collusion. In fact, reading the indictments suggests exactly the opposite, that the Russians were doing their own thing, right?
Yeah. You mentioned some Americans in the last indictment, including a congressional candidate.
Marie, it's not the way you would tee it up. If you thought that you were like on the verge of breaking a big case of Trump and Russia, that is not the way that it would be done. So I think he's making a big mistake continually attacking Mueller because he's sort of begging for Mueller to write a report that's going to be scathing, and just to defend himself.
And it just doesn't look like that from the outside, that's where he's headed.
I don't think so.
Well, does it also accomplish, if the president is silent about it at this point, if these people in his constellation, Cohen, Manafort, and Lisa mentioned a wider scope, Chris Collins of New York. And,
Flynn, Papadopoulos.
But you were saying in terms of Republicans, but I'm saying in terms of the president, because Collins and Duncan Hunter, in that order, were the first sitting members of Congress to endorse the president. So they are in the constellation of conversation that we're talking about. But if it really has nothing to do with Mueller's investigation, why even bring it up?
Well, yeah, I don't mean to suggest that I don't think Mueller is interested in Trump at all, because I think as to Trump, it's an obstruction investigation, not a collusion investigation.
Then the new tweet, the new narrative that you may have picked up, it has nothing to do with me,
right?
Is what the president says. And that you would say would be better nomenclature, better narrative.
It would certainly be better than a full frontal assault on the prosecutor, who up until this point has not even hinted in anything public that Trump is involved in a corrupt way with Russia.
But you've said that this is largely political for the president facing impeachment charges as opposed to actually a legal liability. So it does make sense for President Trump to wage this PR battle against Mueller, because this is a political fight. This is a PR fight. And that's what President Trump is doing. And we've seen in, public polling's been different, but we have seen it going, in different directions and people. And so I think pointing to the Manafort case, what President Trump can say and what Senator Lindsey Graham tweeted out last night, this has nothing to do with collusion. This has nothing to do with what Mueller was originally charged with. So I actually think President Trump is being smart from a PR standpoint and a political standpoint.
Let me just push
maybe
back
not from, you putting your lawyer hat on.
I would push back just in this sense. I agree with you that he's done a public relations strategy because he's thinking about impeachment, which is about public opinion. It's not about what happens in court. But I think you have to play out the whole chess game. And whatever the polls look like now, the last word on this is going to be Mueller's report.
That's right.
But wouldn't it be wrong for him to be swayed emotionally and devising his report?
We talked about this once before. I'm not saying that you say anything in the report that's untrue. But you can write you can write a report, or you can write a report.
It sounds like spin to me.
So
it's not spin. It's how compellingly, aggressively you argue the facts.
It's also worth remembering that the next Manafort trial that will be happening in D.C. is in a large part about Manafort's work with this pro-Russian, pro-Putin Ukrainian politician and party. So we don't know. And there are people that have thought that
a very dirty former president of Ukraine politically.
That was closely aligned with President Putin and with Russia. And so
Is that the guy that Christopher Steele was also working on behalf, it looked like?
No, it's not. Former President Yanukovych?
No, there is another guy that Christopher Steele was
I'm talking about Yanukovych.
Oleg
the person that Paul Manafort was lobbying for didn't report that. And there are people who have said that when Paul Manafort was running the campaign, the platform of the campaign became much more pro-Russian, much less pro-Ukrainian. So I think that these issues are going to come up in the next trial.
We've already learned, even from this past trial, just in terms of that $58 or so million, that's where some of the money was coming from, because he was doing work for that former president.
Well,
so
I'll be interested to see if the trial happens, though. So
now, why do you think a second? Because this is now the second time I've heard this. So why do you think that a second trial wouldn't happen?
Well, if we all are right that what Mueller is trying to accomplish is to squeeze Manafort, it looks to me like he's got him on 80 years of criminal exposure. He's got this D.C. case.
You don't think he'll appeal it? Because his attorneys are saying he's going over his options now.
He can appeal it, but look, that judge put these prosecutors through the paces of all paces.
Yeah, you're not going to get a friendlier judge.
So, and then he's got the D.C. case is a home game for Mueller, which Manafort would have to be concerned about. I'm sure he was happy that the Eastern District of Virginia case was first. And then it's not like Manafort got acquitted yesterday. He's got 10 more counts in his pocket that he could retry if he wants to.
He could definitely be squeezed. And it boggles my mind a little bit when people say the Manafort thing has nothing to do with Russia, because that's where the money originally came from, and that's who he was working with originally. So that's just, it's kind of like that's what it all goes back to. And you see through there how he could have become vulnerable. The question is then, what did he do from there, and what did the president know about it, if anything?
Exactly.
Right?
And I want to make sure we heard you correctly. So the second trial might not happen. So what happens in its place?
Well, maybe he decides to plead guilty and cooperate with Mueller, which is what this has been about all along. Yeah. The other thing is, if he's thinking of a pardon, I think if I were thinking of a pardon, the last thing I would want is my misconduct to be played out in the second trial and make the record worse.
Yeah. Lanny Davis says that Michael Cohen, his client, wouldn't take a pardon. I don't know where Paul Manafort is in that.
I don't think I believe that.
But that's the dumbest thing to say. That story broke at the same time that his sentencing has been put on hold. And the reporting was it's likely because he may be ready to cooperate, too. So you've got Michael Flynn, Michael Cohen, a couple of Michaels, and Paul Manafort.
Yeah,
only the best people.
I think Flynn's sentencing has been put off because if Mueller agreed to sentence Flynn at this point, it would signal that his investigation is over, which it's not.
Yeah, and that's what the paperwork said.
Yeah.
It said that we're not ready yet because we're not ready with. Okay,
interesting.
Great. Wow, so much sadness now combining with outrage. Police have revealed the suspect accused of murdering Iowa college student Molly Tibbetts was in our nation illegally for years. President Trump mentioned this case at his rally last night in West Virginia. We'll talk about the effect and the heated immigration debate. Stay close.
You heard about today with the illegal alien coming in, very sadly from Mexico, and you saw what happened to that incredible, beautiful young woman.
Fox News alert, the suspect accused of murdering Iowa college student Molly Tibbetts set to make his first court appearance today. Police say he's an illegal immigrant from Mexico who confessed to kidnapping and then killing Tibbetts, and eventually led police to the University of Iowa's student's body in a rural area. Tibbetts disappeared more than a month ago while jogging. President Trump addressing the case at his rally in West Virginia last night. Watch.
You heard about today with the illegal alien coming in, very sadly from Mexico, and you saw what happened to that incredible, beautiful young woman. Should have never happened. Illegally in our country. We've had a huge impact, but the laws are so bad. The immigration laws are such a disgrace. We're getting them changed, but we have to get more Republicans.
So, Lisa, there were 3 immigration stories yesterday we watched. Obviously, that one was huge and was, so heartbreaking. There was the mass murdering Nazi who was deported after previous administrations didn't, put in the elbow grease to deport somebody who was a guard and was responsible for thousands of people's deaths by virtue of guarding them in Poland. He was finally deported. And then there was that fake news story about the story that was a lot of reporters were putting out there about, somebody who was racing his wife to the hospital to have a baby and was deported. And here it turns out that he wasn't driving, and he was wanted for murder in another country, and that was totally fake news. 3 immigration stories yesterday that a lot of people may have missed because of the legal news.
Well, and I think it kind of puts in a nutshell how these things are covered by the mainstream media and also by the left. And Mary Ann Mendoza, an Angel mom, was on Fox and Friends recently talking about how the media puts a focus and a premium on these sob stories, which turns out the guy is, wanted for murder. And Representative Kennedy, Joe Kennedy, who had given the Democrats' response to the State of the Union, and clearly the Democrats see him as part of the future of the party, tweeted out about the murderer guy, potential murderer guy, alleged murderer guy, of saying, there's Heartless and then there's whatever the hell this is. Guarantee he's not going to tweet about what happened in Iowa. I've not seen him tweet anything about that. And so I think the point that President Trump has been making, and I think the point that Republicans have been making, is that they wish that the Democrats and the mainstream media would put as much of a premium on American citizens, angel parents, than they do sometimes on illegal immigrants, Maria. And where am I wrong with that? Go to Representative Joe Kennedy's account. Where's the tweet on this?
I think that the idea that Democrats don't care about Americans.
That's not the point I make. I'm saying.
Please respond to what you said.
But as long as you don't inaccurately label what I just said.
Lisa, okay, come on. You just said Democrats care more about illegal immigrants than American citizens.
In some of these stories,
and I think that is untrue, offensive, an accusation that is easy.
When do you ever hear Democrats talk about angel parents?
Let her finish.
No, it's okay. We don't have a chance to say things if people don't let us, Lisa.
That's how I feel very often sometimes with you, my friend.
Here's the point. Democrats, of course, want to keep American citizens safe. The idea that they don't is completely unfair and not borne out by the facts. The truth is, we need immigration overhaul to happen in this country. The Republican House couldn't even pass one of 3 bills they tried.
Didn't get a single Democrat from Democrats.
Go ahead.
Okay.
We need to compromise. We need both sides to not run to the extremes. We need both sides to come to the middle of the table and to talk about how to reform our immigration system. But saying that Democrats don't care about the safety of Americans, that is not compromise talk. Now, I don't think that's going to happen before the midterms. We'll see what happens after the election. But the truth is, there is no one in that Congress that is willing right now to take tough votes on an immigration issue because both extremes of both parties are winning the day.
I will also raise the fact. I will also raise the fact that the
Chuck
House
Schumer
put
shut down the government over DACA and over the Dreamers program. A Democrat leading the Democrats. Some say the face of your party, Marie. And then you see on the flip side, Republicans, some in the House, able to get that 4-pronged bill that the president really wanted, and the Senate not being able to do the same thing, Senate Republicans. It's complicated on the Hill.
And the House couldn't even pass it.
Or the compromise bill that didn't get a single Democrat vote either. So, I mean,
before we get Andy
honest here,
let's listen to what former ICE Director Tom Homan said about how we actually fix this problem, because I think that's at the heart of what everybody's saying. Listen.
This is why we need a wall. This is why we need to fix the loopholes. I'm sick and tired of talking about this issue and meeting yet another angel mom has been created at the hands of an illegal alien. We got to stop politicizing this issue and fix it once and for all.
Well, look, it's hyper politicized, but even the wall, I mean, people hear the wall and they get all whipped up. And, you know, look, probably 40 to 50% of illegal immigration in the country is not border crossers. It's people who come into the country legally and stay. But I think if you don't fix the border enforcement component, I mean, there's a lot of extreme rhetoric on each side. My own position, for what it's worth, is that you have to fix the border enforcement in a way that convinces the country that we're actually serious about enforcing the borders. And then maybe that creates the political space to do all the other things that need to be done. But I think the Democrats think that that's an extreme position, but I don't think it's going to be a position that moves. I think if you don't fix that piece first, then you don't get to everything.
But all of it, I mean, what you're saying is we do need that political space, because when you look at Rivera and the Molly Tibbetts case, he was here in excess of 4 years, worked for a farm in Iowa, and according to the farm's ownership, had gone through some sort of E-Verify situation. So we need to take a look, I guess, at all of it.
All of it.
All of it.
Yeah. All right. The White House now responding to Senator Schumer's call for Republicans to stop the nomination process for Supreme Court Justice nominee Brett Kavanaugh in the aftermath of yesterday's legal developments, whether the move is just plain politics or fair game.
Fox News alert, the White House responding now after a chorus of Democrats call for stopping the nomination process for Supreme Court Justice nominee Brett Kavanaugh in light of Paul Manafort's conviction and Michael Cohen's guilty plea. This comes after Kavanaugh met with a host of senators yesterday, including Minority Leader Chuck Schumer. Here's Senator Schumer today.
It is unseemly for the President of the United States to be picking a Supreme Court justice who could soon be effectively a juror in a case involving the president himself.
What? White House spokesman Raj Shah responding, quote, Democrats pledged to block Judge Kavanaugh with everything they had. Frankly, this latest attempt looks increasingly desperate. The committee has a hearing scheduled for September 4th, and Judge Kavanaugh will be there. Andy, I love you heard Chuck Schumer talking, and you said, what? I mean, you sort of, I think he will get questions in his confirmation hearing about whether he would recuse himself if, for example, anything involving the Trump investigation, for example, a subpoena, would make its way to the Supreme Court.
Why?
Your take?
Why would he?
Well, because he nominated him. He will get the question, I should say.
Yeah, he'll get the question. I think, you know, shoot from the hip, I'd be inclined to answer that and say no, because I just don't think there's a basis for it. But look, we love to say that this was pristine and legal and it occurs on a different plane. This is all about politics. These confirmation processes are always all about politics. The Democrats are going to ratchet up this rhetoric because the margin is very thin, and if they can push a couple of votes to the other side, maybe they block his confirmation. But from my perspective, I don't see anything principled about all this. No. And what I would say is, look, Donald Trump is president until he's not, and I expect he's going to be president until at least 2020, and whatever he does in that capacity, he is permitted by the Constitution to do. I don't think Kavanaugh becomes at all illegitimate because of whatever problems President Trump has. Deal with it and vote. And
Harris, yesterday he met with Susan Collins also, and they talked a lot about Roe v. Wade. And I think there is a principled opposition on the Democratic side because they're concerned about that.
Well, they've always been concerned about that. And remember, regardless of what the president talked about on the campaign trail, contemporaneous with his nominating Kavanaugh, he said, when I talk with candidates, the litmus test will not be Roe versus Wade. So I think for Democrats, it's always been something that they're interested in. The constituency of women, they're telling, be worried about it. I don't know how necessary that is, or necessarily as language that is. But I would say this, I give more credit today than I had a week ago to Democrats for sitting down with her. And it's not just a couple in red state, you know, where they're in trouble. And I do so for two reasons. For one, well, now they can just make that document ask, I guess, now directly to the candidate, right, to the nominee. Good luck with that. because they have a lot of documents already. But the other reason is, how do you go back to your constituents and say you didn't even try to get to know somebody who's potentially going to hold the job for decades? So I give them more credit this week than last. Where I would like to see Democrats get, if it's possible, is that those hearings then ask those questions that really matter and not just all the political ones that Andy's talking about.
Well, I know, and you talk about like what is principled versus political, saying that your position on Roe v. Wade is a principle. Yeah. But that is about politics. I mean, I understand how everybody feels about abortion rights is very much moral in their mind, but is a political point. I think everybody's voting along political lines. I think it's the point that Andrew was making, is that we know you're going to vote based on your politics. I don't even think there's anything wrong with that. You know, it's better to be honest going on. There's no way I'm going to vote for this person because their politics don't line up with mine, but I still want to talk to them and hear what they have to say. And everybody's guilty of that. I mean, on the Republican side, totally, the whole Merrick Garland thing, completely political. So it happens on all sides. Let's
Susan
just be
Collins
honest.
was the only Republican to meet with him.
Well, I think the problem is that Supreme Court nominees, this used to not be as political, even some of the...
That ship has sailed.
No, but I mean, for even under some of the...
In the 90s... Well, no, but what I'm saying is, what was... Ginsburg was like 98 to nothing. Scalia was like 97 to 1 or something.
So it used to not be as political not too long ago.
You were
and
too ashamed to vote on party lines at that point.
But the fact is, since, you know, Democrats blew up the filibuster in 2013 for the lower court nominees, which then led to Republicans blowing it up for Supreme Court nominees, point being is this ship's sailing, it's moving forward. Kavanaugh is going to be confirmed unless he implodes during the confirmation hearing. This thing is happening. As long as they get Republicans on board, you look at polling in a lot of these red states. There's been polling in Alabama, Indiana, North Dakota, West Virginia. Majorities in those red states want their senator to confirm Kavanaugh. So the point being is, as long as
candidates are helping that desire among their constituents.
As long as Republicans are solidly behind him, you are also going to pick up some of these red state Democrats, and this is happening. So we can debate all these different things, and Democrats can raise all these different objections,
you a quick question?
But it's happening.
Does this change the way we look at the Supreme Court justice position? Because as you pointed out, with those huge majorities in favor, bipartisan, nonpartisan, whatever it was, but does this fight kind of cheapen or weaken?
I think that ship has sailed. I think a lot of people, myself included, look at the court as much more of a political institution than a legal institution than it used to be. And these battles are political. Donald Trump is president today because of Justice Scalia's seat.
I agree.
I think if that had not been the case, he would not be president. This is infused with politics, and I don't think there's any getting away from it.
Well, we will continue watching that September 4th, the hearing. We will cover it and bring it to you when it happens. President Trump calling out the NFL players and the league itself over national anthem protest, and now he's going after ESPN. What the sports network did and what the president has to say about it next. Stay tuned.
You're all proudly standing for our national anthem. Thank you. The ESPN thing was terrible. Just came out.
We're outnumbered in just a moment, but first, let's touch base with Harris and see what's coming up on Outnumbered Overtime in a few minutes. I feel like you were just right here next to me, Harris.
I know, those commercial breaks, we accomplished so much. A big show for you coming up in just a few minutes. President Trump going after the Russia investigation after 2 of his former associates have been convicted. Is he right? Robert Mueller's probe has strayed way too far from its original intent. Congressman Matt Gaetz and David Cicilline will debate. And that will be spicy, no doubt. Plus, we're awaiting the arraignment, yes, due in court, that illegal immigrant accused of killing Iowa college student Molly Tibbetts. Is this more proof that we need tougher immigration laws? Senator Joni Ernst of Iowa will weigh in when she joins me. Top of the hour. Melissa?
All right.
Look, it sounds like a good show, Harris. All right, well, President Trump again weighing in on the latest in the NFL national anthem controversy. At his rally in West Virginia last night, he set his sights on ESPN this time after the network announced it would not show the anthem in its Monday night football broadcasts. Listen.
It was just announced by ESPN that rather than defending our anthem, our beautiful, beautiful national anthem, and defending our flag, they've decided that they just won't broadcast when they play. So while the players are kneeling, some of them, not all of them at all, you're all proudly standing for our national anthem. Thank you.
So, Marie, what's interesting here is, President Trump has held a White House summit on criminal justice reform just a couple of weeks ago. He met with a bipartisan group of governors, attorneys general. Do you think if the players took this off the field that there would actually be room for compromise on criminal justice reform?
The people that kneel should be fired. He called them sons of bees. And
but on the issue that they're making this of criminal justice reform, do you think there's area of compromise there?
Well, I think possibly, and we have seen people like Malcolm Jenkins, Chris Lawton, and others who have gone out, worked with communities, tried to get players into the communities to talk about these issues. Donald Trump has said these players should be fired. I'm sorry, yes, he held a roundtable, but his language against them is so incredibly offensive. And look, Lisa, the ESPN doesn't normally broadcast the anthem. This is their normal procedure. They're not going to change it now. They didn't make some new decision. Donald Trump thinks this issue wins with his base. But that's all he's doing is playing politics.
But his issue has been the fact that they're doing this on the time of the game, that the fact that they are doing this on the clock when they're supposed to be playing games.
And their owners can make that decision.
And so the difference that I am making is that they brought this off the field, which is what the president has the issue with. Maybe there'd be areas of compromise if they didn't do this during the game.
Well, maybe
but more largely speaking, Melissa, so you look at the majority of voters, not just Republicans in his base, have actually largely been against the kneeling. You look at the majority of Americans, they don't want to see this happening. So how do you think announcements like this from ESPN play into that? Where do you think viewers are going to feel?
I don't know who they're polling when they're asking them how they feel about this. I love football. We watch football in my house. I am generally not organized enough to be there at the start of the game when the anthem is going on. I am still creating snacks in the kitchen and getting organized and getting people to sit down. So I don't know. I feel like this is an issue that every corner thinks plays for them. I don't think we even know what everybody's kind of doing it for a different reason. They're out for a different issue. They're standing up for a different right. And the whole thing kind of just goes by, and then it's, time for the 7-layer dip.
Well, I just think he's a master culture warrior in the sense that he can take a 50-50 issue is good for him. It's a disaster for the NFL, and it's probably a disaster for ESPN.
But they didn't change what they did. They've never broadcast.
So, Andy, do you think, though, so now they're trying to come...
So maybe I wasn't making chips. It just wasn't on TV.
It just wasn't on.
That explains a lot.
When I was a kid, deep into the last century, they always played the national anthem, and they haven't done it for years.
Here we go.
Well,